like, no, there are certain things I'm not tolerating. I'm not going to interact with. I don't want to have another. I'm not going to try to convert this motherfucker into anything, because he's a 50-plus-year-old human being who has clearly gone down his paths into these kinds of places already. And even in the I'm trying to be polite because we're maintaining business cordiality, lets that kind of shit slip. On this episode of Brews BizDev, I'm joined by Jonathan Mahan. And to switch things up a little bit, we've got a debate episode. So while John and I have a couple beers, we debate the relative merits of verbally online punching Nazis. Do you punch them? Do you expose them for who they are? Or do you try to engage them and bring them to your way of thinking? We talk about that and a lot more in this episode. Enjoy. Thanks for watching. And please remember to share and subscribe. Hey, Jonathan. Thanks for being here. How's it going, bud?
It is going well. Thanks for having me on here, Paul. I am settled in, getting comfortable, and just cracked open my beer. So we're good to go.
Yes, beautiful. And let's hit that first. So what beer are you drinking here today?
So today I have a Sam Adams, and it is Sam 76. It was part of like a summer variety pack I got over the summer that hadn't quite finished up.
Excellent. The endless summer. I'm going to go with it's Powerful Pils, and it's it's an Imperial Pilsner done by a local brewery here, Community Beer Works. Looks like in conjunction with someone, and they're a great brewery. They're a client of ours, and one of the reasons that I like them is they're always doing these projects with other breweries, oftentimes like benefiting social causes, and social narratives, and hence the name Community Beer Works. They're that kind of an organization, and so I like to spotlight them whenever I can.
That's cool.
And I also like the color scheme on this one. Goes nicely with my nails.
All right.
Yes. Ooh, that's good. Okay. So introduce yourself, elevator pitch professionally. Who are you? What do you do for our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, so my name is John Mahan. I live in Colorado Springs, have for a few years. I'm a professional salesperson. Right now I'm working for a company called Tube Science, which does, sales in like the advertising space, or rather, I do the sales for them and they provide video creative in the advertising space. I've done sales my whole career, but I've always found that I always had hobbies and side projects outside of it, right? And my most recent hobby and side project is a podcast I'm running called Courageous Conversations, which is dedicated to having those difficult conversations, those awkward conversations that we as a society have all kind of learned to just avoid. But actually, by not having those conversations, we do so to our own detriment, but also to the detriment of society at large. So this is a podcast dedicated to showing people how it's done and learning how to do it well, and kind of focusing on that subject matter.
Cool. Yes. And I've caught some of the content, right? So I came across, I think I want to say it's been very recent. So I think that just the backdrop here leading up to our conversation here today is we became connected out of Madison Butler post, I believe. So after she came on the podcast, I put some stuff out, made a bunch of new connections. I think you're one of them. And then I saw, well, before I responded, I think in any way, I saw it might have been the first one you released of the Courageous Conversations. I forget the guy's name at the moment. Shit, it's gone. And so it was a conversation. I remember you saying, kind of in your intro, like, this is the first of a series we're going to be doing. And I wasn't sure if it was just with him or it was going to be with other people. And I remember, you gave this big intro to what the series was about. And you gave the big kind of, let's call it a disclaimer, which I actually fully appreciated, because you started it with saying, by the way, and, not to label the person you were with, right? I think you said that. You said, like, hey, not to put labels on you, right? But I just want to say we're going to talk about having conversations in a calm and detached way. And we're two cis, straight, white guys, right, talking about the value of being detached and not being triggered. So, and then let's have these conversations in a civil way, and and on from there it went, which I really appreciated. His kind of take and where he went with it. And I didn't watch the entirety of the whole thing, right? At a certain point, I kind of got myself a little like, yeah, I don't need to listen to this anymore. I've come out of some real rampant self-help spaces and all the mindfulness shit, which has value in certain places. Frankly, actual places of trauma is not one of those places very frequently. And the white guy who started equating people in oppressive situations to like dealing with his kids at home, and like which was a conversation that was happening, like, oh, even if it's not oppression, it's like, hey, wherever, I just don't get stressed anymore because I'm meditating and mindfulness, and I'm staying detached, so my kids at home and the normal everyday life stuff, which is not what the conversation we're here to have is about. Right? Everyday life stuff doesn't require fucking courageous conversations. I mean, like the serious, hard to have conversations with people who were possibly virulently on the other side of an equation from you, and hostilely and violently so, is kind of what the series is about. So I checked out of that conversation, and you had shared another post leading into another one where in the post you talked about the benefits or not of verbally punching Nazis, right? So our conversation today is about the relative benefits, a debate, let's call it, between two viewpoints on the relative benefits of verbally punching Nazis online and in such interactions. And certainly where I immediately interacted and then kind of stopped because I wasn't trying to make another point necessarily, was, since we're using that word and we're getting specific about that term, like, yeah, no, I'm all for, and it's not just the online version. I mean, I've got the hoodie I've been wearing today is like I'm okay to show up, and when people are on the streets attacking people, like, I'm okay with being in the mix and protecting people. And so Nazis, neo-Nazis, like, explicitly outed themselves like, I hate, and my doctrine is about eliminating certain groups of people either from the planet or from my physical space, is where I draw the line on civil conversations, right? Personally. So, which is what I commented, and then people fed back in a number of different ways. I turned the comments off at some point because then other people were on that thread down later. I was like, I can't interact with these folks. LinkedIn's already kind of harshing me and like throwing clamps down on me and giving me a warning everywhere I go to try to stay respectful. So I'm just like, all right. And then, and you said, I think I said like, hey, I'd love to talk about it, right? Be in the conversation. So this version of it we can drink through. So here we are, having a conversation, adding alcohol, which I hear is always the thing you want to add to a potentially contentious situation, is just add some alcohol.
Alcohol and politics, match made in heaven.
Yeah, you're gonna talk openly about politics, so might as well start drinking. So why don't you, like, now that we've caught ourselves up to what we're doing here, like, why don't you go ahead and kind of like give us, your position, what it is that you were ultimately getting to with that post, and what that, that next talk you were delivering, and where you stand on the matter of, and let's open it up, like, to maybe not actual explicit Nazis and neo-Nazis, because that's not, nobody really declared on LinkedIn, right? Nobody's declaring themselves that. Their actions show something. You don't have to look too long in Madison's inbox before you're like, no, they're here. But if we open that up to anyone espousing an ideology that ends up or starts with the removal of people and the kind of dehumanizing of certain groups and the lowering of certain groups, so that kind of an ideology, your position is what?
So my position is definitely more useful and practical and important when dealing with the more moderate people, right? Although I would still say it still is true, even if it's maybe less useful and less applicable when you're dealing with the extremes, right? But basically, I guess we'll call it a realization or change of heart, is I realized that when someone shows they're ugly online or in person and they start spouting hateful beliefs, terrible things, it causes me a lot of pain, stress, anxiety, and I'm not even affected by it, right? The people are affected by it even more so. So the easy solution, the way to make all that pain go away, is just to press block. Then they're out of your world. But they're not out of the world. And just because you don't see them anymore doesn't mean they're not there. They're not still doing harm. And I've realized that collectively, as an entire society, we have taken to the block solution as our first line of defense against people who make us angry. So block, 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 right? I did a poll on LinkedIn last week asking how many people during 2020 alone had blocked more than 5 friends or family member. And over half the people said more than 5, right? So like the majority of us have blocked more than 5 people in the last year.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely people's first line of defense against people who make them angry is block. And again, that makes them disappear from your world, but they don't disappear from the world. And someone's got to deal with their shit. And by you blocking them and saying, it's not going to be me, generally what happens, that keeps cascading down until they run into someone who can't avoid them, right? Maybe it's a transgender person they work with who can't avoid their transphobia, right? Maybe it's a family member who can't as easily cut them out of their lives, right? Like this crap just keeps rolling and just keeps going. People keep kicking this can down the road saying, I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to deal with it. And generally it ends up being the person who is the most victimized by that ideology, who can't escape it, who ends up having to deal with it, right? So what I am kind of preaching, we'll say, is that that block solution should be an absolute last resort that you should only use when you absolutely have to. Your first line of defense, your first way of dealing with this is to really engage with these people, converse with these people. And the reason I feel this way is that in the last 6 to 12 months that I've been looking at this, I have found numerous different examples of people who left hateful groups, who dropped hateful ideology, who opened their mind, opened their eyes. And every single story I've heard, what did it was not someone verbally punching a Nazi, coming online, telling them you're a racist, bigoted asshole pig, and you're the worst, and get out of here. I don't want to see you again, right? That has never changed anyone's mind in the history of ever. Okay, it's an exaggeration. It rarely changes people's minds.
Yeah.
What works is when people show patience, kindness, empathy, compassion to these people who don't deserve it. That creates cognitive dissonance. That creates some trust so that conversation can happen. So eventually their eyes can be opened. So we're in this world where we know, okay, blocking people does not get rid of the problem. In fact, if anything, it offloads the problem on the more marginalized, suppressed people who can't avoid it. And dealing with people with empathy, compassion, and kindness has a chance, albeit a small chance, of changing these people's minds and opening their eyes. So my position is that as much as you are able, it is your social responsibility to engage with these people and do your small part to contribute to eventually helping open their eyes. Because if you just block them, you're just pushing the problem off on someone else. And again, these people don't go away, right?
Yeah.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. Cool. So, and then I'm going to say that generally, and again, if we bring in the caveat called, this is not about anyone who's directly impacted, because people who have been impacted and traumatized, the decisions are different, the standards are different for decision making. The requirement of protecting oneself, starts to trump a little bit higher if you don't have the resources internally to deal with things. So that aside, for those of us who seems like we can hang, right, and there's no direct ingrained response going in a different direction, that's certainly the blocking as the first mode, yes, only solves a personal problem, and that's fine. In certain times, in certain modes, you got to protect your space however you can. And yeah, it's become the default because our whole culture is about fucking personal space, right? Individualized personal space, and let me just carve out my own little world, my own little bubble. And of course, then social death does ensue, right? You make those bubbles, these things are designed to reinforce that and give you more of what you'll engage with. And so you end up in a bubble, which doesn't help the political scene, doesn't help a lot of things. And to be clear, yes, that's only relevant for certain types of folks who were talking about being something, I think you said earlier, like moderate or something reasonable, which aren't the kind of folks we're literally talking about in the conversation, right? So we can't really have a conversation about someone who's overtly hateful and actually has an ideology that acts that out, and then pretend that we're dealing with something that's moderate or reasonable. So that's where one of the things where I come in and say, okay, well, that doesn't actually translate. We're not talking about should we block or verbally punch a conservative person, someone who views themselves as fiscally conservative and might have an opinion regardless of where it came from on a certain politician or a certain if the the Bush and Reagan style, conservative folks is not really who I'm talking about. The extreme Tea Party-ish KKK level kind of like culty, totally unreasonable, like demonstrably unreasonable. Then we're left in the second part of your conversation, which is okay, if we pull out the block until there's just no other way, right? Until it becomes so obvious, like there's nothing that's going to happen. And if it's some asshole spouting off that's not, as far as we know, in some group who is going to like go hit the streets, and then find some freaking 75-year-old protester to beat up, because I live in Buffalo. We've had that happen a few times here since the summer. So in Rochester, our little neighbor called Rochester is in the news right now for the cops pepper spraying a 9-year-old who's handcuffed in the back. So so there's some real things, and separating that somewhat from online. Like you said, there's the compassion approach, right? There's the giving space to understanding how someone can get there. I remember someone commented on the thread that we were interacting on, saying with a nice story about how they, interacted. And then someone explained, well, here's how it was when I grew up, which was a wonderful fucking explanation and something I don't care about, like personally. Like I can understand just about anything, and all the time in the self-help courses and the constant introspection and the constant learning where other people are coming from and hearing people share, like awful stories from their childhoods and things, you get a good sense of like, oh yes, we are the people that we would have ended up being in whatever those circumstances were and whatever our reactions were. But at a certain level of speech, and with a certain the activities and the beliefs that come along with it and that follow from it, that then for me, there's a line. There's a line, and it's not the clearest line. It's not the straightest line, but there's a line between, okay, am I here to understand someone? Am I here to even change their mind? Because I'm all with you. Like pounding back on someone doesn't change anyone's mind. It reinforces it, right? It's like the backfire effect. It's confirmation bias. Everything in our brain says if we yell something, someone yells the opposite back, we just get more entrenched in our position. So my position is not about changing people's minds. My position is about and sometimes it's fun to let them punch first, right? To like just show enough of the face to like let the punch come out. That's really my approach, is to like, let me just be provocative enough so that people show who they really are and publicly, which is something I've done online with family members who eventually we ended up blocked, right? Eventually, oh, this is also going nowhere. I'm out. Like there's no point here having this conversation. But my personal thing is to let them show who they are. And I'm not trying to change them. I'm not trying to change their minds. I mean, I've dealt with people who have come out of groups like that, and like, hardcore murdering biker groups who are also like white supremacists, and found their way out a la American History X, style. And even in the movies, when they romanticize this kind of stuff, there's it's not actually them people opening their minds. It's like them actually dealing with the results, the personal impact of being involved in that kind of shit is, and then other people being available to them. So there isn't a, like, listen, if you want to talk, like have a normal conversation, right? Like we can talk. But if this is what you're leading with, then fucking A, do I have a response for you? And for me, the punching does equate to real life stuff, because I do run out since the mid 90s when pre Antifa, where, that kind of stuff started in American. That scene was like Nazis and people showing up at punk shows and hardcore shows back in the day. And then certain of us, like there's either like those folks either come in and they take over everything and they start brutalizing people and they end up running the show because that's how force works, or you repel them with force. And there's no fucking chat. There's no propaganda song that was going to make the difference. Like they knew that music too, and they were listening to Screwdriver or whatever it was, and they're coming in to, now, can you therapize them for 100 years and like maybe you get an impact? Like, yeah, while they're restrained somewhere. Like, that's a conversation for prison abolition, right? Like, constrain, like restrain someone from acting it out, and then see if you can like bring a change. But online, in spaces where people are being out like that, I like personally to bring it out even more of them, and then come back with the, you know, some queers bash back kind of mentality, because that's where I'm at, from having had some people come at me just for being around the people like Madison in the world, right? Where people are just leveling venom at her. They're leveling venom at all aspects of her, some of which, you know, we share certain identifications. And then I'm like, oh shit, it's late at night, and here I go, like interacting in a thread that I shouldn't be. But yeah, that's mine. Is if your approach is great for reasonable people, I don't feel like that's who the conversation's about. What do you think about?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the people I have in mind when I preach this message, predominantly moderates, but I will happily engage in a conversation about the extremists, because I do still believe what I talk about still applies there, even if it's less, it's still true there. It's not as useful. You may not actually choose to pick up my paradigm and use it in those scenarios as often, but it still holds true. I think there's this balance, right, between doing what's right by you and doing what's right by society. And we all throughout our lives have to maintain that balance of doing what's best for us and doing what's best for society. We have a responsibility to both.
Yeah.
And when you block someone to make them disappear out of your world, you're cashing in on that do what's right by me mindset.
Yep.
When you decide to sit and talk with someone who makes you angry in the hopes that you can be a small part of helping to open their eyes one day, you're taking, you're cashing in on that do what's right for society paradigm. So when it comes to the people on the far end, right, it becomes a much bigger price for yourself to engage in conversation with them. And the possibility or the likelihood of actually affecting any good in the world becomes much smaller, which is why I say at the extreme ends, while my theory is still true, it is less useful, because that sacrifice to me gets really big and that good to society gets really small. So it becomes much more acceptable to just bow out and block them. But I think that's the way people should be thinking about it at all times, right? Is if I keep this person around, and if I talk to them, I'm doing some small bit of good for the world. And if I block them, I'm saying, forget you, world, I'm going to take care of myself. And again, I can't tell you how to balance those two things in your life, right? And this isn't the only area where those two things are at odds with each other. That is a running theme throughout everyone's life. They have to decide best for me or best for society. But I think that's the way we should be thinking about it. And again, it seems like people have just taken this reckless approach of always using the block first.
Right.
And our society is paying a price because of it. But I am happy to keep talking about the extreme cases just for the point of this conversation, keep things interesting. I'm curious, your approach, right, of don't try to change them. You're never going to change them. Just get them to show their ugly faces so the world knows who and what they really are, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have said the second part, but the other parts, yeah.
Okay.
You're probably, the odds are not in your favor. So in the name of the best social good, to your point about the social good versus your own, like instead of just like blocking, I want you to show yourself to as many people as possible so that people can make their own choices on how they interact with that.
Yeah. So what do you see as being the net positive impact of that approach? How is the world better after you've engaged in that approach compared to if you hadn't?
Well, I think visibility matters, which is a popular saying, and I mean it in a different way than most people are, right? Where marginalized identities being visible, that certainly matters. But also people being revealed. Like there's a certain thing that's come about in society and culture between the internet and how our society is going, where and whatever, chicken and the egg as far as what's causing what and which one's in the driver's seat. But there's something about, we know more about what other people around us think and feel and do and act on, and in some cases. Now it's a certain filtered view for sure. It's whatever people are trying to put out, or if they're filterless, whatever just happens. But to some degree that's been horrifying, finding out some things, the degree to which all the ways we can disagree with people that we just never even knew, because even if we all technically felt the same thing, we didn't know this much about each other unless we were really, really, really close, right? So that's got a certain impact. But that's how it is now, right? So there's that much knowledge. If you're playing on social, there's that much knowledge available. And if you're, let's like the all lives matter trope, that kind of thing. So when people can spin, because I mean, we're all getting bullet points fed to us by propagandists in one section or another, right? So we're repeating memes, the old school meaning of the word before it just meant an internet graphic with text. We have that stuff running through us, and so if we're repeating certain things and it sounds good, it's like, well, all lives matter, or for me, it's like well, blue lives matter. Like all these are non-responses to Black Lives Matter. It's a non-shitty way, but you figure it out soon enough. The dog whistle it is. It's a non-shitty way of saying yeah, no, they don't. I'm not even willing. I can't even say that word. Now it's a cool. It's a Marxist organization. Blah 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 blah. Most people deny it. That's just actually true. I mean, I've read Black Lives, the organization's thing. They're all about the queer stuff as well. They're all about deconstruction. It is an anti-capitalist organization. It's not a criticism. That's true. But that you can't say the phrase, but you say something that's not true to you, like all lives matter. I've known plenty of the people who say that, they're not live their lives the only time all lives matter is when they're responding to Black Lives Matter. The only time blue lives matter looked to me as I saw a whole bunch of people beating cops to death on the Capitol steps. Blue lives mattered a little bit less. And I assure you that some of those folks have those stickers on their pickup trucks, right? I mean, it's not totally true across the board. Those particular 6 might not have been that, but that's mob mentality. That's when it goes. It's not about blue. It's about order. These conversations are about keeping a very specific order in place. And that order has certain folks by design, not by a broken system, by design at the fucking bottom. And that's Black, that's people of color, that's LGBTQ, that's certainly women. It's it's there's that structure. So when the people can just do all lives matter, and they do the flowery version, but secretly, a little more secretly, then there's the nasty version in the back of the head. The kinds of stuff that someone like a Trump was genius at just tapping right into, like most authoritarians are, and then riding that shit home. That's there. And I know it's there. And I want to see it come out. And I don't want to pull it out if it's not going to come out on its own. But in any kind of a pressure situation, if it's going to come out in a fucking online interaction, you can bet that in any kind of real pressured situation, I know where their decision making is going to go. I know what groups voted for whom and which were surprising. And, those are the kinds of things that I think there's a benefit to letting the actual, the lower down, closer to the lizard brain, their actual beliefs about stuff. Come out in an interaction so that everyone else who's connected with them can see and align or not, right? Either oh, cool. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, no, I think that I think it is criminal when those animals are out there rioting, but this is really cool what's happening at the Capitol. And no, I don't see any discrepancy or what the reasoning would be, the difference between the two. That's the kind of conversation I just want to poke a little bit. And then come on out. And I suck at poking a little bit, admittedly. I poke a little harder than some people on what I think is a little bit. Trust me, it's restrained. And then let their rhetoric kind of take care of the rest. And then let it play out. And if it's not going to interact, or we're not going to, and I've done pre-COVID, coffee meetings with people who got, post Charlottesville. Which for me was the big oh, fuck this business kind of stuff. I have to tell the truth about where I'm at about stuff online. That was a big thing for me. I'd been playing the don't talk about any of that stuff because you have business contacts. I mean, which is another, I think, part of the conversation that's relevant for what we want to talk about here. You're in sales, right? And doing some video sales and doing different shit. And we're presenting tough conversations, if nothing else. And so there's an impact. And at that point, I set some stuff aside, got into it with some business contacts, and then tried to meet, did some coffee meetings. Like we said, listen, this is always harder online, right? This is this is a caricature. So let's sit down. And it does usually go better when you sit down. Our natural biology, once we're in a room together and we're reacting to each other, calms it down a little bit. And then, then it's hey, well, I want to ask you some questions. let's talk about like, I mean, these sayings on this placard you've got up on your picture, like, sure, Black Lives Matter. I mean, that sounds fine, right? But do they really? Is a real life response I got from someone in the local business community. When we had already decided to like tone down and sit down and like talk through it. And I thought like, hey, we're going to go down a, it's like, wait, what, what? Like what? And then, you know, like next week it was an anti-Semitic post from some website. Like, you know, not the article he sent. The article was just fake news, like crazy batshit fake news. But I was like, what's that? And I clicked through on the website and it's just littered with like rat Jewish like rat cartoons and like it's like New World Order. And so I mean, I'm like, you know, this guy's done. I'm done with him. Like I'm not going to interact with him. I blocked him there. I let the Chamber of Commerce that I knew him through know. I facilitated a networking group that he was in. I said, like one of us isn't coming in, or if we both end up in that room on Tuesday, like it's going to be a real problem. So like, you know, figure it out. And then, you know, and they removed him. I mean, it was like, no, there are certain things I'm not tolerating. I'm not going to interact with. I don't want to have another, I'm not going to try to convert this motherfucker into anything because he's a 50-plus-year-old human being who has clearly gone down his paths into the, like these kinds of places already. And even in the, I'm trying to be polite because we're maintaining business cordiality, lets that kind of shit slip. And for me, that's a bit of a win. For me, because I could tell other people around who wanted to know why he's not in the group anymore, like, listen, it wasn't a fit. Some stuff happened. If you want to know, right, I'll tell you. Because I'm not in the business of hiding or coddling hatred or bigotry or those kind of ideologies that back that up. So that for me, the social value is that people can make a clearer decision on how they want to interact with those folks. Because one thing I do believe, it's not the best change of heart tactic, but more so than force. Because as soon as you stop applying force, the change reverts, right? That's a human tendency. Is if it's a have to, that's if it's only a have to, as soon as you don't have to, you go back to whatever you were doing. But some things, you know, we are social creatures. Even the most supposedly individualistic and don't tread on me of us are social creatures. And when you start to remove that, a Trump without a Twitter is, you know, if a Trump falls in the woods with no Twitter, does anyone even hear it? Right. I mean, I've got a feeling like that dude has a way bigger problem with having no Twitter than he does not having the job anymore. Right. Like there's something about pulling away voice, pulling away the social validation of like, you know, you're a good guy, but like if what comes after but is that, you know, you're racist. Or I mean, I've had relatives tell me stories about going queer bashing back in the day. This is post me coming out. The stories didn't go anywhere. They didn't fucking, like, there was no like at the end, like, can you believe like how insane and backwards we were? It was like, oh, it was weird, we never found anybody, you know, so we just ended up going to the next bar. But like oh, you routinely went out looking for queer people to beat up or God knows what. Like what are you telling? And then there's still no, but anyway, like, let's just change the subject. And it's just like, fuck, like, no, like, I'm sorry. That's like, you know, those kinds of things aren't in my moral system okay. They aren't okay to leave in the conversation. It's not a difference in opinion. It's not a respectable opinion. I understand they didn't invent it themselves, but I do believe that there's some degree of I'm not all in on cancel culture. I mean, that shit gets out of control like crazy, even more than the blocking does, you know, like people getting destroyed. But like, no, you should be outed for things you know, there should be some kind of accountability, even if that's just other people being aware and then choosing not to be around you anymore. And I think that has a value and is more likely to change more those kinds of minds, pulling away whatever social support they have and then still being available for it. Like if you want to have another conversation, another kind of conversation, then there's some kind of social support available, but you don't get social support acting like that, except for these other even worse assholes. I think there's a value in that. And I would guess that mixture, someone else being available, but other people not being willing to, has had a little more impact than the straight up whitewashed MLK version of like turn the other cheek, just let it be. You know, again, I'm not talking about moderate. I'm not talking about reasonable. I'm talking about folks who have already gone down far enough down a certain lane, and something needs to be done to counter that. That a nice chat, given that we're in two different information bubbles and they don't trust anything that I'm going to bring to the table, it's never ever going to fix.
So you think exposing someone for, you know, what their real beliefs are, right? Which then, you know, causes many people in their lives to say, "Ooh, yeah, no thanks. I don't want to be part of that."
Yeah.
And then they find themselves more and more alone as people disconnect from them once their secret of being white supremacist or racist or transphobic or whatever, once it's out. You think that's a good thing? What impact do you think that has on that person? Right. So you get them to say something in a comment thread like, I just think Black people are lazy. That's why I believe this. And suddenly some of their business contacts are saying, we're done. You know, friends, family, people saying, no, breaking ties with you. What impact do you think that has on that individual? Does it leave them unaffected? Does it make them become more extreme? Does it make them become less extreme? Does it give them a better chance of seeing the light, a worse chance of seeing the light?
I would guess depending all of the above at a different point, right? So again, the key being similar to your block scenario, not straight, like the message is never from everybody. You're just done. I can't believe you said that. And then everyone in the family says, don't ever talk to me again. You're cut off no matter what you ever do. There's, in my experience, what I've seen where this stuff has been in families or in social circles, some people are like, fuck it. Like, yeah, like there has to be a real good story if I'm going to ever talk to you again. Some people are like, I will never talk to you again. And some people are like, oh, fuck, that's off. And I'm not going to tolerate it. And again, if we want to have a different conversation, right? Like, I love you or whatever it is. And we're not having that conversation. I'm not going to pretend that you don't believe that. But if we want to engage, there's a requirement for engaging, right? We're not going to have I'm not going to spend an hour and a half of my time or whatever the hell it is, sitting down, debating, like we're debating here, the relative merits of genocide. Like, I ain't having that fucking conversation at all. And I'm glad. Now, the beauty thing of being in a society and in a world, right, is we all don't have to have the same position. So I also know, right, my position is informed by other people are not all going to take my position, right? That my position works. I always like to say it's Black History Month. So as we are two white guys talking about this, obviously we need to bring this in. But, like the Malcolm and the Martin, right? Like Martin, ineffectual, like toothless. And when he was actually threatening, finally ended up getting killed when he went after the whole system and not just what should have been like 150-year-old absurdity of voting rights. Someone else needs to be like, I'm going to defend myself. Like, I'm going to, like, you got gun, like I got a gun, like you come in my house, I'm gonna be using my gun, and that's the end of the fucking story. Like, there's no, not, and Malcolm Martin wasn't turning the cheek totally. That's more of the bullshit history, but it was the like, I'm gonna put myself in harm's way and show my power through that I can take this and not fight back. Yeah, that doesn't. I believe there's a reason he got killed last in the lineup. That's my personal belief, right? Is that the people who seemed really dangerous got killed by an establishment, the FBI, in order of danger. And actually, I guess Hampton got killed after him. And then by that point, they stopped even trying to cover it up. So I believe your position and my position, somewhere in the orbit, is the combination that works. Like, someone's got to be like, that's fucked up. That's totally wrong. And I'm not going to deal with it. And then someone has to be like, yeah, that's all true. And like, let's see if we can get to the bottom of this.
And I'm happy, right, saying that both parts are necessary, right? The problem I see is that everyone's volunteering to play the one part and no one's volunteering to play the other part,
Online, it seems that way, right? Because the loudest voices and the harshest shit comes to the top.
Yeah. Here's my fear. You mentioned that 50-year-old business contact of yours who shared, if I remember right, he shared some fake news article.
Yeah.
And then that same website was posting out Jew rat stuff, right?
Yeah. Like covered in it. Yeah. They weren't posting it. It was like literally the theme of the website.
Okay. So the way I see this is that he had contacts in his life, probably who were more extreme than him, who were introducing him to this. And he had contacts in his life who were not at all of that mindset and were like you and, maybe moderates, maybe liberals. So he had a nice mix of influences on his life, right? Mm-hmm. Now, he started to get pulled into those more extremist influences. He wasn't sharing the Jew rat stuff directly, but he didn't bother him, clearly, because he was still willing to share the article. He also was losing touch with who you can trust and who you can't trust because he was sharing fake news like it was fact. To me, he is an incredibly vulnerable person who needs every person in his life who's on the left pulling him back, so he doesn't slip further into that extremist view. And when you ban him from the Chamber of Commerce and cut ties and cut friendships and cut family, there's suddenly no one pulling him that way anymore. And now the only voices in his life who are willing to talk to him are those extremists. In fact, he probably feels hurt and angry and misunderstood by people like you cutting him off. Yeah. And because he feels hurt, angry, misunderstood, when someone from the extremist side says, no, we understand you and we value you and we respect you and you're welcome here, he's going to get pulled further and further in. And suddenly he's no longer just tolerating the fact that this website has Jew rat imagery on it. He's now suddenly embracing that. You talk about, I'm not going to have a conversation about the merits of genocide with somebody. That's fine, but understand that person's going to have a conversation with somebody about the merits of genocide. Question is it going to be you or is it going to be someone who's a ridiculous extremist? And the truth is, once someone gets to that middle ground point where they start spouting out offensive, terrible shit, immediately the only people willing to engage them in respectful conversation, willing to have a relationship with them, are the extremists. So once someone gets to that point and we all respond by saying, yuck, cutting you off, now there's no more anchors tethering them to reality. Now it's so easy for them to slip into QAnon nonsense, right? So I would say that person, that was the worst time you could have possibly cut them off, is right when they're on the border of, conspiracy theories and losing touch with reality. That should have been the time when you messaged everyone who knew him and said, everyone needs to go sit down and have a conversation with Dave. I think we're about to lose him to extremism if we don't engage him in polite, decent conversation, right? I think the best chance for saving that person would have been to strengthen ties with him, to pull him back over, instead of cutting ties with him so he drifts into extremism.
Yeah, and if everything... Actually, no, I would say even if it were as simple and that were the actual background of the situation, I would still not necessarily agree. The idea that it starts to become on everyone else to then band together in a constant thing, because I don't believe that everyone on the internet or anyone everywhere for that matter, is in my position. I've gotten plenty of blowback from the position I'm in. I've had plenty of these kinds of debates. They're not always on a podcast, but there are plenty of other folks who are want to be more moderate. There are plenty of people in my family or step family or whatever, just recently, that have been blocked after a long interaction. Not everyone in the family cut them loose. Some people for their own personal reasons, right? They want to get cut off from the grandkids. And so the parents still talk, even though it's oh yeah, she's batshit, she's really gone down the tunnel with this stuff and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's ever quite as black and white as obviously as it can be when we're trying to do a simple debate, right? Because life doesn't boil down to simple. So I don't think everybody is in my position, though I think you see a lot of it online, because then the people who engage also probably aren't going to pick that forum to try to have in-depth conversations, because it sucks for that. Right. So the engaging with folks, if you're going to engage with them, if you want to have a conversation because someone's espousing genocide and you want to spend, and you have whatever your resources and time of day are, where you're going to decide to devote yourself to bringing that person back and calling in the troops to bring someone back who's already saying that stuff, that's fine for some people, I guess. That's probably not where I'm going to spend my hours. But some people do. I think some people are doing those things. And then there's a strike count for me, right? And the fact that it means if I don't save them, it'll get worse, leads to a really shitty level of savior complex and falsely ladled responsibility to myself. And as someone who's been around enough now dead addicts, including family members, and who always has something you could have done more, you could do more, you could have done more, and is always got that, it's not workable or useful in any way to constantly engage in, well, why don't I engage with people I fucking can't stand even more because I'm going to be the one to save them. And if I don't, they're going to end up, in, higher ground or in some movie plot where they're up in a fucking tower shooting, at people. Like, A, it's not fully my responsibility to save everybody. Just like it's not my job to attack everybody. And in a platform like, and so, we've seen each other in LinkedIn. My other social channels are a little even dicier, but I tend not to interact all that much. I'm just like putting information out there. I don't go on other people's stuff anymore to argue posts because I'm not interested in it. Like, I'm not interested in like, hey, oh, you expressed this, let me tell you that it's wrong. I mean, that's cute. That's been working great since the internet started and social media in particular started. Like, let me put out this. Certain bubbles do form, but to a degree, that's how social stuff works. And then there are groups, there are different kinds of groups and people doing different kinds of work. And some folks, just like out in the actual streets this summer and recently, you go to a protest and like, if you look from the right, you see the monolithic left, where everyone from, Joe Biden supporters down to the black hooded fellas, they're all on the same team. We're just out there crushing. And of course we're out in there and there's like maybe 8 or 9 different factions at least, right?
Sure.
There's people who are doing, and some of us came in the same fucking car, right? So if I'm going with my, my wife and stepdaughter at the time, and they've got signs, and Megan's is a little more poetic. The kids is a little more like police is a terrorism unit or something like that, inflammatory, but they're standing in the back. They're like in a safe spot, like they're just being there, registering their presence. And I'm in the front because I'm doing the role of I'm the body in front of the other bodies, right? Like I'm protecting other people from them possibly getting hurt as we get hit with rubber bullets and all sorts of shit. Like does everybody play that role? Like, no, everybody in that setup can't play the role. Some of us get to, because of I'm a big white dude. So that mix of things, those 3 things means I'm going up front in that line. And so when the people drive into the crowd and take people out, and then they get pulled out of the car and they get beat down, and then the cops come at us and then rushing everything, like I'm going to be the one who's going to be taking the hits and making sure that the people behind me don't. And so does that for me translate a little bit role wise into the internet? Fuck yeah. That's why I'm in Madison's comments. Like, I am going to be the one. I'm not the only one. And most people are not doing anything like what I'm doing. There's a reason Madison is so shocking to people, because most people are not even out front just about who they are, when who you are is a list of identities that individually put you at the bottom. And when you put them all together, people are like, get the fuck out of here. Like, how dare you? You're subhuman, So for me, it's a specific role. It's a role I take, not in the way that I think everybody else should do that all the time or at all. But like, I'm okay being the guy. Like, I'm okay being the guy in the black hood who's in the way so that other people aren't getting the fucking pellets, and they can stand there with their nicely created signs that they spent 3 hours on. And, I'm not starting fires. I'm not like instigating anything, but I sure as hell I'm going to get in the way. And I don't mind in that situation either letting the cops show who they are. So that's where I'm at. It's not necessarily a universalist thing, right? Where I think that my position needs to be taken by everybody. I know that it won't be. And then some of us have to. And if there weren't like you having the other side of the conversations and people who are about engaging people, then like, yeah, shit would just get real. But I know that there are, and I know they're just not as visible online, which is why I also appreciate what you're doing online, right? And why I wanted to engage this way and not getting some fucking bullshit about it is because I believe that like what you're doing has like a no doubt fucking value for making things better in the environments. I also believe that whatever it is I'm bringing is a necessary step for people who can't defend themselves.
It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, the theme comes up again and again when I talk about this people of, wasting your efforts on people will never be changed, and your own personal mental emotional bandwidth and your time restrictions, right? So again, I return to, I'm not dictating for everyone what that balance of good for you versus good for society you should adopt. Just recognize that by cutting someone off, in all cases, you're engaging in what's best for you, and by engaging with them and talking with them, being calm, I would say in most cases you're engaging what's best for society. It's up to you what those measures look like, right? Because you're right. There are some people who are willing to invest time, effort, and energy on someone who's probably a lost cause, just on the chance. And some people who are only willing to invest time and energy in someone who's shown some real signs that they could be saved, right? And again, I leave that up to everyone to make their own decision. Just recognize what's going on here. When you block people, you're not helping the world get better, right? When you engage in that conversation, that is, while it may not be the most effective thing, while it may not work in the majority of cases, and people still believe what they believe. Only documented way I've ever heard of getting extremists to drop their extremist views was patience, kindness, empathy, and compassion. So if you want to choose to bow out of that fight, that's respectable, but just understand that's what you're doing, right? Understand you are stepping away from the best chance you had, albeit slim, the best chance you had at changing that person. And you're instead choosing to preserve your own mental health and well-being. And again, everyone has to make those decisions from time to time. But I just really want people to make that a last resort, not a first option,
No, and on that specific point, I think we're actually we're agreed. I don't like to block everything that makes me uncomfortable, right? Is not to fucking think about it, right? There's a consequence for everything. Blocking also has a consequence, and if you weigh it for yourself and come down on the side of blocking, then so be it. Some of us will poke a little harder before we block. Some of us will engage before, at some point, either we block or the platform in some cases blocks people for us, and it removes people for better or worse. And knowing that for me, the big ending thing, right, is, and I'm going to use that same metaphor, is we need the Malcolms and the Martins. Someone's got to make sure people know that there's a fucking line that will not be crossed and what those line is. And then other people need to be willing to spend their resources engaging the folks who have not crossed that line. So
cool. Well, I appreciate you having me on for this conversation, right? This is still a fairly new perspective in my mind. So every conversation I have, it gets a little more well-rounded, a little bit more balanced. So I appreciate you for adding a little balance to my perspective on this topic.
Yeah, likewise. And again, I appreciate what you're doing out there, that you're bringing this conversation into it, because the interwebs can end up being extremist, and that's the only thing you hear, and the people who are not just aren't talking, right? So having a conversation and bringing that to the foreground is great, in the same way that I like bringing a little more of the spice, especially to somewhere like LinkedIn, which is so fucking stiff and so professional, which means certain things for some of us, and they're not good things. So yeah, in there I'm striking a little harder, and you're bringing a way, more measured tone and tips, right? I know I made fun of the guy earlier and stuff, and those things have their place, but techniques and tips for people who want to be able to engage the folks who are still engageable is a resource that makes a big difference. So I appreciate the work. I appreciate you coming on, digging out a Sam 71 or Sam 76 out of the closet. and yeah, we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure, my friend. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Have a great one, man. Talk soon. Brews BizDev is hosted by Paul Greiner and produced by Renoun Creative. Check us out at renouncreative.com. Are you fucking kidding me?